Ladies and gentlemen, we do thank you very much for your attention, and now we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the
Welcome to our top travel destinations. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan. I have been editor of the weekly travel news column in the Sunday Independent and the Fine Wine and Food Guide, and I am here to use my decades of experience to help you know exactly where to stay, eat, drink, shop, and explore when visiting the world's top travel destinations. So sit back and enjoy the wonders of travel as we take off on our magical journey together. Welcome to Kevin's Top Travel Destinations. This week is a vital episode, Saving a City, and we're looking at Venice and the MOSE barrier. But I want to imagine you're standing with me in St. Mark's Square. There's a Venetian guide there. She's touched my arm and she said, "Look down." And there, from the grill in the drain, right in front of the cathedral, the water started bubbling up, rising up through the drains, up through into the square itself, as if the sea were underneath the city. Which, of course, it is. It was almost surreal. The orchestras were still playing in Florian's. The pigeons simply moved to a higher table, and the most beautiful square in Europe slowly turned into a mirror. That's the Acqua Alta, the high water, and the Venetians have lived with it for 1,500 years. But something has changed. The sea is rising, the city is sinking, and the storms are getting stronger. This episode is about the machine built to save Venice, and why Venice is a warning for every coastal city on Earth. So let's look at why Venice floods. The Acqua Alta is a conspiracy of three things: a high tide, low pressure, and the Sirocco wind pushing the whole Atlantic up towards Venice, like water sloshing in one end of the bath. Meanwhile, Venice itself is slowly sinking. While the sea around it rises, the city is losing ground, literally at both ends. And here's the cruel part. The damage doesn't stop when the water goes down. Salt soaks into the marble, the brick, the mosaics, the plaster. Then it crystallizes inside the walls and quietly tears the buildings apart from within. Every flood is an acid bath in slow motion for 1,000 years of art and architecture. And the numbers are quite disturbing. Venice measures floods in centimetres above the average tide. Let's put this in simple terms. If the water goes above 2.5 feet, St. Mark's Square floods. If it goes over 3.5 feet, 40% of the city's underwater. If it goes over 4.5 feet, nearly half the city is flooded. The margins are tiny. A few inches is the difference between wet shoes and a citywide disaster. Now, there have been horrendous floods. We're talking about November 1966, the record. That's 194 centimetres or 6'4" of water. The flood shocked the world and it launched the whole Save Venice movement. But then in November 2019, another massive flooding, another surge, just 2 inches short of the record, 6 foot, more than 80% of the city underwater, the crypt of St. Mark's flooded, shopkeepers wept in their doorways. And the bitter irony, in 2019 happened when the Great Flood Barrier, the MOSE, helped to prevent exactly this, was sitting in the lagoon, finished, but no one had switched it on. Can you imagine? Left unprotected, this wasn't going to be a once-in-a-generation tragedy anymore. This was becoming a regular event. Enter MOSE. After 1966, Italy argued for decades about how to defend the lagoon and the city of Venice, and the answer finally approved in the 1980s under the construction from 2003 was MOSES. But the acronym is no accident. MOSES is Italian for Moses, the machine that parts the sea. It's 78 enormous hollow steel gates, all painted bright yellow, laid out across the three openings where the Adriatic enters the lagoon, the Lido, the Malamocco and the Chioggia. Crucially, it protects the entire lagoon, Murano, Burano, the whole watery world, not just St. Mark's Square. Here's how it works. Most of the time, you'd never know MOSES was there. The gates are full of water and lie flat on the seabed. Ships sail straight over them. When a dangerous tide is forecast, compressed air is pumped in, the water is forced out, and the gates become buoyant. They rise up out of the sea like a yellow submarine. It takes about half an hour to raise. A typical closure lasts 4 or 5 hours, one tide. And for those few hours, Venice does something extraordinary. It creates actually 2 sea levels. The Adriatic raging on one side, the lagoon calm on the other. It can hold back a tide of nearly 3 meters. Does it work? Yes. On October the 3rd, 2020, MOSES rose against a real high tide for the first time. And it was a tide that should have put St. Mark's and most of Venice underwater. But the square stayed dry. Venetians stood there filming the puddle-free stones in disbelief. There was an interview with one of the guys who has a shop right on the edge of the Grand Canal, who was in tears of joy because he hadn't been wiped out. And many people have left because of these continuous floods. And MOSES has since stopped dozens of floods that would have damaged the city. Now, what's the catch? Because there's always a catch. The price was $6 billion, and the project was years late. 2 terrible costs to the city with that big flood in 2020. And a corruption scandal became a national disgrace. Bribes, kickbacks, arrests. But the former president himself of the Veneto region, Giancarlo Gallan, took a plea deal, 2 years and 10 months in prison and a 2.6 million penalty, because he was convicted of taking backhanders, taking all the money that the donors and institutions had given to build this incredible MOSES project. Others were convicted or settled. Not everyone investigated was. So for many Venetians, MOSES is both saviour and scandal, the thing protecting their homes built by a system that actually betrayed them. And of course, it must be maintained forever. All 78 gates live underwater in salt water. Corrosion, sand, silt, algae, barnacles. Each gate has to be lifted out, cleaned, repaired, repainted, tested. Costs around $63 million a year just to run and maintain it. And some estimates say that it could head towards $100 million a year. MOSES isn't a wall. It's a vast machine, and machines need minding indefinitely. So what do Venetians think about this? There's that wonderful interview with the shopkeeper who was crying tears of joy. And I talked to the guide, and I've talked to other people who live in Venice, and there's real gratitude. There's no more of the dread of hauling your stock onto high shelves every autumn, no more pumping up the ground floor, the smell, the dirt, the horror of a flooding. Hoteliers say guests no longer cancel November bookings in fear of news of a flood. But you also hear scepticism, hard-earned, the years of delay, the money that vanished, and a quieter worry that the world will look at Venice and think, problem solved, when actually it isn't. Because as scientists point out, the deeper dilemma, MOSES was designed for a sea level that is already out of date. By 2100, Venice could see roughly 30 to 60 centimetres of additional sea level rise on a lower emissions path. But here's the twist. MOSES' limitations may not be how high the gates are, it's how often they'll have to close. Because every closure of the lagoon stops shipping, and it seals the lagoon off from the sea. Close it too often and the lagoon can't actually breathe. Pollution builds, oxygen drops, algae blooms, the ecosystem suffers. It's not a pleasant thing to reflect on, but every time someone goes to the toilet in Venice, it goes straight into the water. So you need fresh water flushing in from the Adriatic to literally push and sweep all the crap out. And a barrier designed for a few times a year, if it's going to be used every other day, it's going to make the waters of Venice totally unsustainable and difficult to live with because of the pollution and the smell. But I think you may be saying, so what about Venice? Venice is a rich city for rich tourists. But it's lot more than that. As I say, it's really the canary in the coal mine for coastal civilization. The estimates that roughly a third of the world of humanity lives within 100 kilometers, 62 miles of a coast. Nearly 900 million people live less than 10 meters above sea level. That could pass 1 billion by 2050. What succeeds or fails is that Lagoon holds lessons for all the other cities that are vulnerable, like Venice, London, Rotterdam, New York, Miami. Of course, my own city of Dublin. If we lose Venice, we don't just lose the most extraordinary monument to human ingenuity ever raised out of the water. We lose the first great battle of the age of rising seas. And every coastal city in the world should take note of how this story of Venice ends, because it could be the end if we don't do something about it. The honest answer is it's a national engineering infrastructure, not a museum. There's no ticket office. When the gates are down, they're invisible. And you could get a boat out or evaporator out to the Lido and head down to San Nicola on the northern tip, and you can see the artificial island and the breakwaters and the works where the barriers cross the inlets, but it's not really an attraction. And of course, when you can see it, it means there's a storm, and you wouldn't be allowed to go out anywhere near it because it would be too dangerous. So let's go back to the square. St. Mark's Square, back to that afternoon a few years ago before MOSE had come into being, when the sea came up through the stones and the drain at my feet and the whole square turned to glass. Today, when the sirens sound across the rooftops and the great tides roll up the Adriatic, 78 yellow gates rise silently out of the sea just a few kilometers away. And in the most beautiful square, in my opinion, in Europe, the water no longer bubbles up. The orchestras play on. Even the pigeons stay where they were. Moses may say Venice for our generation, but Venice is sending the rest of us a message. Engineering can hold back the water for a time, but the future depends on how high we allow the sea to rise. And that is a choice that you, me, and everybody else makes every day. So go to Venice. Enjoy walking St. Mark's Square while it stays dry, even though there's a storm and thunder and lightning and rain. But bear in mind what's going to happen in the future if we don't change our ways. And that's where travel can be incredibly informative. Enjoy Venice while you can. It is one of the wonders of the world. But take away the message. We need to address this issue. And Venice is the bellwether.